Hi, welcome to the Newton Park Heritage Project. This project has been dedicated to spreading awareness about the history of the Newton Park campus and its nearby buildings. I'm going to be explaining the importance of the heritage of these buildings and the campus, as we believe it's very important to share the fascinating heritage of Newton St. Lo and its owners to preserve its unique architecture and untold stories. We're going to be uncovering the untold stories of the Newton Park and the Langdon family links to the merchant ventures of Bristol, and the political and economic importance in the region and links to the members of the transatlantic slave trade. We can talk about that in a bit. Here we are in the village of Newton St. Lo. During 300 AD was a Roman villa. It would have stood just outside the parish boundaries. After the Romans left Britain, the Saxons settled here, and they were the ones who developed it to become Newton St. Lo. If we look at the impact of the Norman conquest, the Newton St. Lo family owned the estate for 300 years. Each generation was passed down for over 300 years. In 1666, Joseph Langdon purchased that land. And then in 1942, the Duchess of Cornwall purchased the land and now is part of the Bath Spa Campus University. There's an untold story about Joseph Langdon's association with the Bristol merchant venture in the 1690s. It allowed the Bristol people to sell in the African slave trade. Many of the members of the Bristol merchant venture are directly involved in the transatlantic slave trade, and Joseph Langdon would have benefited highly from being part of the committee, considering his brother Thomas was mayor of Bristol at the time, and it was a very large supporter of the slave trade. The Langdon family would have gained a lot of finance as a result. I think you can guess where I'm going with this. Some of the most prominent buildings in Newton St. Lo in the village, such as the shop, the thatch, Newton Farm, Spencer's Cottage, the fountain and the horse trough, were very likely to have been directly funded by the Slave Trade Committee. Even the manor house on the Bath Spa campus could have been expanded by the profits by the slave trade. The Holy Trinity Church has been little affected by the 21st century architecture. The village has kept its rustic, authentic image, and it stayed like this for centuries now. However, All Saints Church in Corston, which has been built in the 10th century AD, it was constructed by the abbots of Bath. The church was rebuilt and restyled from the 13th century up until 1865, and now has neo-Gothic architectural features. The village of Corston is a parish located 4 miles from Bath. That's why I'm not here today. Founded during the Saxon period and originally called Corston, which meant Marty Stream. In 941 AD, King Edwin gifted the lands to build Corston Church. Perhaps another untold story about Newton St. Lo and Corston is that in 18th century, the Langtons built Newton Park as parcels for land for coal mining. This was around 2 to 3 acres, and many of the employees were men who lived in villages of the Corston and Newton St. Lo. And this is why when the coal works decided to close, there was a 17% reduction in its population of Corston and Newton St. Lo. Here we are at Newton Park's one of the most historic places in Newton Park. The gatehouse and the keep are some of the only things that have stayed preserved by this place. A lot of it has been updated, and this manor house is very aesthetic. It really helps aid the look of the Bath Spa campus. It's a very old and beautiful look. It's mainly filled with offices now, and Mr. Lancelot Brown was responsible for the upkeep of this very renowned architectural piece of landscape and design in the 18th century. The first owner of the manor, Geoffrey de Monterey, Bishop of the Countess by William the Conqueror. Geoffrey was advisor to William the Conqueror to help consolidate power after the Norman conquest of 1066. After a few generations of ownership, Edward Neville was the owner of the manor until 1626, and at his death, his widow sold it to Joseph Langdon. It is likely that the Langdon family stayed in the manor while the mansion was being built up into the 1760s. The House of Newton Park was constructed in the 1760s by the Langton family, prominent members of the merchant ventures in Bristol, and in 1666, Joseph Langdon purchased the manor of Newton St. Lo from the widow of George Neville. The 14th century manor house had to be drastically modernised in the 1666. This would change the name of the estate from Newton Court to Newton Park. And then in 1940, when the Duchess of Cornwall bought the estate, Newton Park would be leased for the Prince of Wales for use of teacher training in 1946. And this building would have held many of those lessons. And this is when Bath Spa campus became a place for higher education. Here we are at Newton St Lo Castle. It was built during the Norman period and used and expanded in the Tudor period. It was used to fortify the manor house over there, and because it was such a great position and the manor house was used for such important productive assets. Newton St Castle has a very interesting untold story about Joseph Langton's sisters, whose remains and skeleton and coffin were found under and around the castle. This is showing that the castle was originally used for a burial grounds. The walled garden, another historic location of the Newton Park campus. It was used to grow fruit and vegetables and flowers, and is still done today. Even 300 years ago, it was used for this very thing. The people who worked in the garden would live in the bothy within the walls of the garden right here. In the 18th century, Lancelot Brown decided to put the garden out of the view of the house, and that is why it remains here, well away from the house. He must have had a dislike for gardens like these. Today, the maintenance team and the students still produce and cultivate this garden, and I'm very passionate about keeping the wildlife on Bath Spa campus.